She's ready.
Seeing that we have quorum, the chair opens the October 25th meeting of the Community Housing Committee by roll call vote. And I will call them by name. Richard Carroll,
Here.
okay. Lee,
Present.
BJ,
Here.
and myself. So I'm present, I make the quorum. I will now turn the meeting over to our capable leader, Mary Wagon, and she will introduce the housing production plan.
Welcome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mary Wagon. I work for the town of Yarmouth, and I'm the town's Affordable Housing Program Administrator. On behalf of the Community Housing Committee, it is a pleasure to welcome you here tonight, where we will present to you the town's draft housing production plan. The Housing Production Plan, or as we call it, the HPP, is the town's strategic plan to meet its housing needs. The HPP starts with a housing needs assessment, identifies challenges to meeting these needs, and then continues on to set housing goals and production strategies. The HPP will be presented to you tonight by Karen Sonneborg of Sonneborg Consulting. But first, I would like to acknowledge the Community Housing Committee members and their work on the HPP. The committee members are Lorraine Doyle, who's our chair, Masha Bissell, Richard Carroll, Lee Hamilton, Mary Reardon Johnson, Myra Schuhensitz, DJ Sullivan, Brad Goodwin, and Drew Krause. In order to garner public comment for the HPP, the committee hosted 2 housing summits, one in January at the Senior Center and one on a virtual platform in February. These involved over 70 people of our community. This was followed by a survey, a community housing needs survey, where over 430 people responded. Tonight, we'll present to you the draft of the HPP, which incorporated the input from the summits and survey. After the presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide comment on the HPP. I just want to let the people know on Zoom, when we get to our question and answer public comment section, if you could use the raise hand function on Zoom, we won't be monitoring the chat. And now I would like to hand this over to Karen Sonneborg, our housing consultant, who will present to you our draft housing production plan.
Great. Thanks, Mary. And thanks to those of you who are here for participating, and also to those of you who are attending virtually. I'm going to try to go through the key takeaways from a rather detailed and comprehensive document. And I'm going to try to go through this expeditiously so we can hear from you at the end. Anyway, so I'm going to get right down to. So Mary already mentioned some of this before, which saves me time, which is this: the state has a number of requirements for these housing production plans, and they have to include the following components: an executive summary, a comprehensive housing needs assessment, as Mary mentioned, challenges to producing affordable housing with suggested mitigation measures and how the town can, through recommendations in the housing plan or through other efforts, try to deal with the challenges. Housing production goals, and I'll get to this momentarily, as well as housing strategies. And we've broken this down into 4 different categories of strategies. Actions related to zoning, to capacity building, and that includes those actions that will boost the town's ability to better promote affordable housing. Housing production and housing preservation and assistance. There are also appendices in the plan as well. So what are housing production plans? These are actually a subset of the Chapter 40B regulations and comprehensive permits that were meant to give communities greater local control over affordable housing development. Um, the first step is for a community to prepare a housing production plan that meets all the state requirements, and then to actually produce units. The equivalent of at least 0.5% of the year-round housing stock, which is 57 units for Yarmouth. And then if it does produce that amount, it gets what's called certified, which means that it has the ability to deny what it might consider inappropriate comprehensive permit projects without the developer's ability to appeal that decision of the ZBA. If it actually produces 1% of its year-round housing stock, which is 115 units, it gets a 2-year period, what some refer to as a safe harbor from unwanted 40B applications. So what is affordable in Yarmouth? And I put the capital A affordable. These are the units that the state counts towards that 10% affordability goal, 10% of the year-round housing stock in order to not be susceptible to what the town might consider unwanted comprehensive permit projects. So a unit has to meet a number of state requirements in order to be counted as part of the SHI or towards those annual housing production goals that I just went through. So of the 11,479 year-round housing units, and that's per the 2020 US Census, which is actually down from what it was in 2010, 596 or 5.19% are included in that subsidized housing inventory, those capital A affordable units. And that's actually up from 4.95 in 2010 because the total number of year-round units went down. When the residents at Yarmouth garden units are added, that number of SHI units will increase to 636 units, or 5.54% of the year-round housing stock. So Yarmouth is more than halfway towards that 10% affordability threshold and has made steady progress. For example, in 2007, there were 362 SHI units. In 2010, that went up to 405. In 2015, it went up to 520. There's still a current gap of somewhat more than 500 units to meet that 10% level. Just to mention on the SHI, 76% of the units are rentals, 24% are ownership, and 24% of the units were actually permanent through Chapter 40B. There is quite a bit of analysis in the housing needs assessment on key demographic or economic shifts. Just to name a few, the recent population has increased from 23,793 residents in 2010 to 25,023 based on the 2020 US Census count representing. That's about a 5.2% increase during that decade, somewhat lower than the statewide growth rate of 7.4%, but still much higher than all the population projections had calculated. And, you know, this is not a surprise. This has been an ongoing trend in Yarmouth and throughout the Cape. There have been declines in children and gains in middle-aged residents and significant projected increases in seniors. Just to give you an example, for those under 18, in 2000, they comprised 17% of the population. 2010, that went down to about 16%. In 2020, 14.5%. And this is also reflected in declining student enrollments. And once again, you know, something that's happening not just locally, but across the Cape as a whole. And those 65 and over have increased and are projected to become 37.4% of the population by 2030. Some significant increases in middle-aged residents that will feed into that over 65 projected growth. Substantial growth in minority residents. In 2000, non-white residents represented 5.6% of the population. That grew to 8.8% by 2010, and it's now up to 19% of all residents, representing a very welcoming community and some greater diversity. Rising incomes, but still relatively lower than other Cape communities. The 2020 census estimates indicated a median household income in Yarmouth of $68,385, which was lower than the Cape-wide median of $76,863 and still lower than the statewide median of $84,385. And just wanted to emphasize that while this plan really does focus primarily on those residents with incomes at or below 80% of area median income, the intention is still to focus on a wider range of income levels, including those who might be making above that 80% AMI level, but who are still priced out of the current housing market. And just the chart, the bottom line, it represents increase in median household income, and the top line are increases in the median value of owner-occupied properties, so includes condos as well. And you see very clearly the widening affordability gap in this particular chart going from 1990 to 2020. Just brief kind of highlights of some key housing shifts. There's been slower recent housing growth with some decline over the past decade. There was a total of, and the chart shows in the right, the blue columns include the total number of housing units from 1990 to 2020 based on census information. And the red smaller columns include the total number of seasonal or occasional housing units. And from 2010 to 2020, the number of total units decreased somewhat from 17,464 units to 17,299. Seasonal units, you see, have been increasing. And based on the 2020 census figures, 1/3 of all units in town involve seasonal units or second homes. There's been a net loss of rental units and continued growth of seasonal housing units, as I said, and second homes. Rental units, units have either been converted to owner occupancy or to seasonal use. For example, there were 2,809 rental units in 2000. That declined to 2,749 by 2010 and down still further to 2,131 units in 2020. Prices have been rising, but are still lower than most communities. If you're looking at the median single-family house value just recently in 2020, that was $370,000. It increased to $441,000 as of the end of 2021. And I just checked, and based in September 22, the latest figure that we could get, it's increased to $522,500. So prices are still rising. And COVID did not put a dent. If anything, it exacerbated housing prices. For example, the relatively short supply of year-round rentals, seasonal rental prices, and impacts of COVID-19 complicated the rental markets and they pushed up prices. The kind of average rental price now is about $2,200. It's kind of year round. And just, it's not surprised, not only with rising housing prices and incomes not increasing nearly as fast, that there are not only widening affordability gaps, but there are increasing cost burdens. More and more residents are paying far too much for their housing. And cost burdens means that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether it be for ownership or rental, you have cost burdens and are spending too much for your housing. If you're spending more than half your income on housing costs, you're considered to be severely cost burdened. And in fact, a total of 514 renter households with incomes at or below 80% of area median income were spending more than half their income on housing costs and should be primary targets for new subsidized housing. And these severely cost burdened households represent 24% of all renter households in Yarmouth, and most have incomes at or below 50% of area median income. And also we found that about 36% of all households were determined to be cost burdened. Let's see, next slide. So I mean, a real goal of the planning process has been to bring in community input. And we're hoping, this meeting will further that. We, as sources of input into the housing needs, the housing goals, and the specific strategies, we have relied on the progress that has been made in the previous housing production plans. There was a plan done in 2011 as well as 2016. These production plans have terms of 5 years. And I should mention that we do try to emphasize the progress that has been made. So I think it's useful when we do these updates to have some bragging rights to DHCD and what has been done. So there's a compilation of efforts that we try to highlight in the section on housing strategies. We also looked and relied on the town's vision plan, provided a number of recommendations and had considerable community input and really kind of weighed in on housing. We embraced the recommendations in that plan, as well as the community preservation plan for CPA money, which was recently updated in 2021. I didn't put here, but we also looked at the HUD consolidated plan that you need in order to obtain CDBG Community Development Block Grant funding. This for 2020 to 2024, and really kind of looked at that. And that involves some survey work as well. And then we had some special events. Since Mary mentioned, we had a in-person community housing summit in January, and then we had a virtual housing summit basically based on the same agenda on February 3rd. And then there have been regular community housing committee meetings that have provided some real important, obviously, guidance on the plan. And as Mary mentioned, the community housing survey that was issued a few months ago. And we're just trying to just give you some brief overview of the results of that particular survey. There were, as Mary mentioned, 430 respondents. And the kind of demographic information that we received on those respondents indicated they're not so far different than the distribution of kind of household characteristics across the community, but maybe somewhat younger and a little bit less affluent. 52% indicated affordable housing was of utmost importance, with average score from 1 to 10 of how important affordable housing is of 8.25%, which is a pretty significant score. In regards to specific locations for affordable housing, There was strong support for the reuse of surplus municipal property for development in smart locations near transportation and services, for example, the repurposing of vacant or underutilized properties, and the Yarmouth Housing Authority Forest Road parcels. The comments ranged considerably, though. We had comments saying, where should affordable housing be located? Nowhere from some people, and then others everywhere. So there was a real range on this particular question. There is certainly great interest in providing a diversity of housing types to address a diversity of housing needs. With also support for rezoning efforts to better promote year-round housing. A lot of support for accessory dwelling units, mixed-use development, and cluster development. There is definitely not much interest in providing seasonal housing opportunities. Program priorities include ways to decrease housing costs for seniors, those with cost burdens in particular, down payment and closing cost assistance, completing the wastewater plan as soon as possible, and providing benefits for those who actually are providing year-round rental units. There was an emphasis on benefits for seniors, for workers, and those with disabilities. Certainly an interest for the town to partner with nonprofit developers and service providers, but clearly those with expertise in affordable housing development. And just in summary, how the housing development priorities included year-round rentals, conversion of existing housing, partnerships with businesses, and donation of town-owned property. A preference in regard to target population of year-round workers, year-round residents, low-income households with incomes at or below 80% of area median income, and seniors. But other income ranges were also mentioned as needing to be addressed, including the needs of veterans. So on priority housing needs, we distilled the information from community outreach, from the housing needs analysis, and came up with the following top needs. Clearly, year-round rentals came to the top, particularly for the community's most vulnerable residents. And there were a number of considerations that were involved in this particular suggestion, where about a target of about 80% of the new units to be produced would involve rentals. One consideration is that almost all state, federal housing financing programs are targeted to rentals. So if the town's going to leverage its limited CDBG, CPA, housing trust resources and go to some kind of scale, it needs to go through rental development. Also, all units in a Chapter 40B rental development count towards the SHI, even though a substantial percentage are market rate units. Also, the high demand for affordable rental housing is reflected in the 660 applications that were submitted for the 40 affordable rental units at the residences at Yarmouth Gardens. Of these, 515 qualified for participation in the lottery. And the list of applications lottery was comparable for the Yarmouth Commons project. Due to concerns about seasonal workers, the Yarmouth Chamber of Commerce issued a survey to obtain a better understanding of the business community's workforce housing needs. And the result was that this year that the businesses would be short for about an excess of 100 individual for housing. So housing shortage of about 150 individuals for this recent season. So despite rental being the top priority, year-round rentals, certainly the town's future housing agenda includes homeownership as well. First-time homeownership as starter housing, as well as opportunities for downsizing. Although there is an issue in qualifying long-term homeowners for affordable housing, given financial asset limitations. But there is also a great deal of support for housing those with disabilities and making sure that there are more units available that are handicap accessible and have some on-site support services. And also recognition that financial and technical assistance was important to improve housing conditions and prevent evictions. So through the community outreach process and meetings of the housing committee, we also identified aspirational goals, more qualitative goals on where the town should be heading with respect to its future housing agenda. The housing needs assessment really looks at where we've been and where are we now. The housing goals start focusing where do we want to go, and with the housing strategies being within the context of the priority housing needs and these aspirational goals. So I'm just going to read through these. Implement policies that increase access to and availability of affordable housing in Yarmouth and promote equal opportunity in housing. Target programs which assist the most vulnerable in the community. Stabilize local households, helping both tenants and homeowners stay in their homes as long as they wish. Leverage local funds from other municipal sources. Promote affordable housing consistent with local needs and Yarmouth character as it, and then also to create greater housing diversity, including unit types, sizes, and costs based on Yarmouth's changing demographics. And there's more. Preserve the existing affordable housing stock. Rehabilitate housing which serves low and moderate income households. Seek out and encourage the development of innovative strategies designed to address housing needs of Yarmouth residents with particular attention to the needs of low and moderate income households, individuals, and workers. This includes the creative use of land and reuse of existing properties. Promote smart growth development principles, including encouraging housing development that also preserves open space and natural features. Encourage multifamily and mixed-use development that incorporates workforce housing to support local businesses, including safe, decent, and permitted seasonal workforce housing. Build new affordable, sustainable dwelling units to reach at least the minimum 10% goal for affordable housing as set forth in Chapter 40B, while maintaining the quality of life of all residents. Those are really aspirational and comprehensive, but they're important principles, guiding principles. So zoning strategies within the context of the priority needs and the goals, what actions are we proposing as part of this housing plan? And the first group of strategies involve zoning actions. And it's important to note that the state's Housing Choice Initiative changes now, instead of requiring a super majority of votes from town meeting and the planning board on zoning related housing production actions, it's only a simple majority. I think that's an important thing to note as we move forward in implementation. First is to revise the affordable housing bylaw, which is also can be referred to as inclusionary zoning bylaw. It's a matter of looking at it now, seeing if it makes sense based on current conditions, particularly rising housing costs. Might it be useful to adjust the payments in lieu of actual units, for example? I think it's worth noting that the town's affordable housing bylaw is a pretty aggressive one compared to a lot of communities, and planning board should be commended on that. Modify accessory dwelling unit requirements. The plan mentions that there are certain requirements that might make sense to revisit and revise as appropriate. Allow a wider range of housing types, looking at once again the need for greater housing diversity to address a wider range of housing needs. And it's also referred to as looking at the missing middle. That zoning bylaws often look at, single family zoning for single family or then for apartments, but it's been suggested by planning professionals that there are opportunities to integrate different types of housing that still will fit into existing neighborhoods based on its scale, as well as for redevelopment. And so it's called missing middle context, and which we promote as part of this housing plan. And amend the cluster development bylaw. Cluster development bylaw makes great sense in that clusters the housing and leaves some a significant amount of open space available. It's smart, but there are ways to potentially revise the existing bylaw to better integrate and incentivize affordable housing. We also included a handful of capacity building strategies. One is to continue community outreach and education. This has always been a part of Yarmouth's work, not only in the planning process, but on specific housing initiatives. But we call it out as saying this still is really important. And we suggest that the town gain access to Citizen Housing and Planning Association's municipal engagement initiative. Mary's already done some work on this, talking to CHAPA, and felt that, when the housing plan was in place, this particular program might be helpful in building coalitions both locally and regionally to support housing plan implementation efforts. Expand Community Housing Committee membership and update its mission. This was mentioned as something that time has passed, the less for the Housing Committee to kind of look at their representation, maybe including some representatives of other boards and committees, and also looking at potentially providing some greater clarification on the respective roles and responsibilities of the Housing Committee versus the Housing Trust. Update affordable housing standards that were prepared by the town. Actually, the Housing Committee in 2010, they were revised in 2013 and 14, and they provide some information to developers on the local priorities for development. Given the time, there have been some significant changes in housing conditions since 2014, time to revisit those standards. Continue to capitalize the Affordable Housing Trust. Town had committed more than $10 million to the trust to support efforts with the motel conversions and the buy down program. And I understand another $520,000 has been committed for a recent RFP. Is that 500? Is that part of the tenant? So continue to provide resources for the Housing Trust to promote affordable housing makes sense. Explore options for maintaining year-round units. This particular strategy looks at, what might be reasonable disincentive for some sellers to sell their houses and convert them to seasonal or second homes versus what might be useful additional resources for the town to invest in promoting year-round affordable housing. And it mentions the transfer tax approval that Nantucket received recently, so that it gets a percentage of the sales proceeds from luxury sales goes right to their housing trust. There is some state legislation that's winding its way through the legislature to allow these transfer tax towns to adopt these transfer taxes. And it's a matter of keeping appraised of what that process is and trying to advocate for that legislative change. Housing production strategies. So, actual unit production. Continue to revitalize commercial areas with housing, as these areas are better suited for higher densities and mixed uses. The town's been pretty successful in doing this through the motel conversions, through the growth incentive zones, and the village center overlay district. The idea is, to continue to look at opportunities, particularly with suggested increased density for top of the shop types of units. Continue to make suitable public property available for affordable housing. There is significant precedence for doing this and meaningful precedence for doing this in Yarmouth. Immediately comes to mind is the John Simpson School. And there are a number of options that are suggested in the draft housing plan. And what we heard regularly through the community outreach process was that, and somebody tell me what the actual pronunciation is, because it looked to me like Mattachese School, but no, it's not pronounced Mattachese. Mattachese. Okay, all right. And then the Yarmouth Housing Authority's property of Forest Road also, it kind of come up regularly in our outreach process. Continue to convert existing housing to affordability. Yarmouth's been very successful at doing this. Continue to focus on a conversion, working with nonprofit organizations to convert existing housing for rental occupancy. The buy-down program that converted those units to owner occupancy is on hold for a while, given the costs involved, the subsidies, estimated subsidies involved in doing so. So it's a matter of just feeling way through the market and seeing if that can be reintroduced at some point down the road. Continue to promote local initiative program, comprehensive permit units. This is also referred to as the Friendly 40B program, where the town basically joins hands with a developer on projects that really address local needs and apply to the state subsidizing agencies to get the go-ahead to submit a comprehensive permit to the Zoning Board of Appeals. It has 40B can get a bad rep, but it's a good permitting tool. And there's also part of local initiative program that's referred to as local action units. So for example, if a town is offering a property at a nominal price, or there's mandated by your affordable housing bylaw, and that unit would count it as part of the subsidized housing inventory as a local action unit under the LIP program. And Yarmouth has a fair number of these local action units on its SHI. And supports scattered site infill development. There's been an interest in trying to spread impacts of new development throughout the community. And once again, referring back to this missing middle, finding ways to integrate new housing or redevelopment into existing neighborhoods is a good planning and development tool. And then lastly, our last category, housing preservation and direct assistance programs or strategies. Monitor affordability of the subsidized housing inventory. It's one thing to have units included on the SHI, but it's important to monitor that they stay on the SHI. And any new units that would qualify for the SHI get included. They meet all the affordability requirements. And Yarmouth's lucky to have the community development department, really knows what they're doing and has a database and oversight. We add this here because we believe this is an important component of any affordable housing strategy in the community. Upgrade existing housing stock. I can say Yarmouth has been a pioneer in developing programs to address upgrades of the housing stock through its buy-down program, through the rental homes program, through its septic pumping and repair program, working with Harwich Ecumenical Council for Housing on its housing emergency loan program, for example. These are all been important resources for residents in the community. And to help current and prospective homeowners access housing resources, certainly through community education and referrals to other not only local resources, but to regional resources and state resources have been important. Ready buyers list has been important as units turn over to make sure that they are kind of managing the resale process for people in the community and within this kind of few towns surrounding Yarmouth, and provide assistance to renters once again through numbers of efforts listed in the draft housing plan. The town has been providing assistance not just with units, but actually with some programs. Lastly, next steps. So we are presenting this draft housing plan for comment and questions tonight. The comment period when people can respond will go through November 15th. We'll then finalize the draft and present it to the planning board for approval on December 7th. We still need to schedule an appointment, a time to present the plan to the board of selectmen, because both approvals from the planning board and the board of selectmen are needed in order to submit the plan to the state. The state has technically 90 days to review and approve the plan, but they have been moving on them very quickly, and we're now getting approvals with about a month's period of time, which has been really terrific. And the plan will be included, the draft will be included on the town's website for access. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mary again, and we'll hopefully hear from you.
Okay, so just to review, remind everybody that we are being recorded and videographed. Again, for our residents that are on Zoom, we're not using the chat function. So if you want to make a comment, please use the raise hand function. I would like to recognize that Drew Kraus and Myra Suhenitz is here today. They're also members of the committee. We either didn't catch you quick enough or we just missed you when we took roll call. So I just want to recognize those two members there on Zoom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the flip chart. Okay. And I'm going to let Lorraine recognize people. She's our chair. So if you want to comment, please raise your hand either electronically or physically in the room. Okay. And there's a mic here. If people are more comfortable, I can pass the mic. Do you want to use the podium? Yeah, that makes sense.
Hi, I'm Chris Greeley. First of all, I wanted to commend you. This was a very, very good, clear presentation, and I really appreciate it. It really helped me to understand the sort of handout that looked a little overwhelming, but you made it a lot more clear to me. Thank you. Are there specific penalties if we don't meet all of these criteria? In other words, or what happens, our plan, they don't like our plan, or, are there kinds of things that sort of happen to us if things don't go well with some of what we've done, or if we fail to meet some of the things we claim in this plan? Thank you.
That's a good question. No, there are no demerits if you don't meet any of the requirements. And I got to tell you, there are some communities I work with who literally met none of the requirements, and we did an update and they were approved again. I do think that the state likes to see good faith effort in making progress, but they're not going to deny, there's no demerits or downside for achieving the goals or implementing various parts of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
You know,
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Good evening, members. My name is Kieran Healy. I'm a resident of West Yarmouth. I've been involved with housing in a lot of different forms over the last 40 years, and I'm still at it today. I do get involved with developers quite a bit, and one of the largest problems they have with the creating housing in the town of Yarmouth is the minimum size of a unit. A one-bedroom unit needs to be 750 square feet. And if we just do the math on a one-bedroom unit, your typical bedroom is approximately 12 by 12. Let's just round it off at 150 square feet. Your typical bathroom is 5 by 7. Let's round it off at 40 square feet. Basically, those two rooms take up 200 square feet. So that means if a kitchen, on average, let's say it's 10 by 10, a little more, say it's 150 square feet, then your living room is over 350 square feet. It's a very large living room. It's much bigger than I have in my house. And I find that developers, when they're looking at the costs and they're doing their pro formas, they're looking at units that they just can't afford to build unless they themselves have to get subsidies from some federal agency or tax credit. But the general builder who is building without those tax credits or without money from somebody else, they just can't afford to build 750 square feet for a one-bedroom rent. It just doesn't make economic sense to them. So I know this is something that I come across quite a bit in my daily work, and I think it's important that the CDC should know those particular items that people are facing. Thank you.
well, that's where some subsidy can come in to kind of support those kinds of units. There might also be, for particular developments, DHCD might become a little bit more flexible on some of these unit sizes too. It might be something worth bringing up, dragging Kieran down to DHCD, making the case.
Karen, is your mic on? Okay, good.
Yeah.
See if my mic works. That's good. So when you do a Chapter 40B, there are guidelines, and Kieran has submitted plans under those guidelines, and there are minimum size requirements for the affordable units. We can look at that in our affordable housing standards, because if it's a friendly 40B, right, that's when we can go to the state and say, we have a developer, this is a good development. It doesn't hit your minimum standards, but we really like it. And we have gotten permission from DHCD to waive those minimum size requirements, but mostly for units that were, buildings that were existing, right? But I think Kieran is bringing up the point for new construction. We might want to look at that, have that flexibility too. And I think that's a really good comment. I think that if it's a development that goes straight, is not a local initiative program or a friendly Chapter 40B, and it goes straight to the Board of Appeals, I think the state would be very hesitant to waive any of their guidelines. But most of our developer peeps, come to us first and want to use that friendly local initiative program pathway. Is there? Oh, so Dave, can you let Vida in? So I think, okay, Vida, can you hear us?
Oh, yes. How
Okay.
about you hearing me? You
Yes.
can hear me?
Yes, I've got my marker out.
Okay.
Go ahead, Vida.
All right. I wonder, are there any specific plans in some near future, not, very distant future, but some specific plans to build some more housing for seniors? This is a group that has demonstrated, very specific needs. The waiting lists, as I understand it, have for years have been over 200 or something like that. And whenever any of the housing projects come up, it's never for senior citizens. It's like they were lepers or something like that. I would like to know what the thinking of this group is to ever produce some more housing for the seniors.
So Vida, are you suggesting that be a priority goal?
I would hope so. I mean, considering that it already, as I said, it shows the need. There's very definite data for, the need for this type of housing.
The town was able to accomplish some of that with the John Simpson School, and schools tend to, just given the typical layouts, they tend to lend themselves to conversion to smaller units and typically to seniors. So if there is a school conversion, that might be considered for seniors. And the Forest Road, I don't know what's going on with that at this point, but maybe some
Most-
integration of seniors.
So Vida, in our current draft, the housing production plan, I don't think we have anything identified as senior housing. It's all intergenerational. Even the housing authority, intergenerational. And kind of the approach we've taken, first of all, DHCD doesn't want to do senior housing. They want to do 55 plus. But
Mm.
that's the new, that's the new age is 55 plus. Which is great for me. Woohoo. The other way we can introduce it in the plan, Vida, is to really push for that diversity of housing, because smaller units tend to go to older families, but the 3-bedroom units tend to go to families with children that are a little bit younger. So there's kind of a couple of different ways you can do that, Vida, but that's going to definitely be a comment like the other comments that the housing committee will meet and figure out where that sits in the plan.
Can I respond to that? I still sense a reluctance to provide this kind of housing when there is a very demonstrated need for it. And I don't understand it, why that's the case. I mean, the intergenerational, I think, ends up causing possibly a lot of problems for the older residents there, because if you have children and what have you, it doesn't lend itself a nice, quiet, kind of type of living, especially in these affordable housing projects and stuff like that. And I still sense a reluctance, and I don't understand why. That's my, I'm trying to determine what's the problem. Because I don't think you have a leg to stand on in terms of the need. I just, I'm always waiting to hear that, well, this next project that we're proposing will be dedicated to the seniors, and I never, yeah, Simpkins is the only one that anybody can point to. And you think that should be, the standard forever? I mean, we don't have to do anymore. We did Simpkins and now we don't have to do anymore. Anyway, that's,
In the housing authority, Long Pond Plaza. But you bring up a good point. Give us a little time to chew on it. Okay, Vita?
okay. All right. Thanks.
Anything else?
No, not for me.
Okay. So Madam Chair, is it okay if Chris Greeley comes back up?
I actually thought of another couple of points. One is I get a little concerned about the density. When I see there's like all these multi-story sort of properties, and it looks, just more like apartment life than sort of home life in a lot of ways. And I also worry about the use of some open space around them. I see a lot of paving, I see a lot of sort of sitting right against the roadway, things like that. And I really would hope that a little bit more kind of looking at the whole issue of the sheer numbers. And because I mean, multi-story buildings can be very noisy, having lived in apartments in my early life. And, you kind of wonder if there's more we can do, particularly if we're looking at intergenerational, some of that should be allowing for some space to sort of be outside a little and to enjoy a little bit of nature. And so the density issue and sort of a lot of the location about things. I have commented earlier that, there was research done a number of years ago on the whole issue of auto emissions. And so when we keep placing so many things along heavily congested, roads with intersections and things like that, actually it does have effect actually on young children with their brain development, things like that. And I don't know that it's good for public health just in general. So that sort of getting some things back, having a little bit more, green space and having a little bit, perhaps a little less density would be something that also, I think it's very hard when you're also trying to balance it with the development of more and more units, but really look at that whole issue. Thank you for letting me speak again.
Are there any further comments, questions? Without further ado, then this meeting will be closed. I need a motion, though, from my committee members to start that process. A second, please.
Second.
Excellent. This meeting is now closed.
All in favor?
All in favor,
You have to do it by
sorry.
roll call.
Oh, I thought we just did it
You have to do it by roll call. You have to.
by name.
Yeah.
BJ. Lee.
Lee Hamilton,
Lee
approve.
Hamilton. Let me see. Richard.
Approve.
There's Drew Kraus.
Drew. Drew.
Myra's unmuted. You could ask Myra.
Myra.
Yes. And Drew sent a chat message saying that he had to leave the meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And how about yourself?
And Lorraine, yes.
Okay.
By unanimous consent, this meeting is closed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you,
Yeah.
Karen.
Great comments. And Karen,
Yeah.
outstanding.